Alabama has executed a man who carried out unthinkable crimes against a little girl from Georgia. Jeremy Williams died by lethal injection tonight. He confessed to raping and killing 5-year-old Kamari Holland from Columbus in 2021. Details of what happened rattled that community across Russell County, Alabama, where he committed the crimes. The sheriff there said the execution was a big part in securing justice for the victim.
You know, I think that's going to be part of the healing process. And I know that sounds crazy to think that the death of one person can heal, but I think it's closure. And I think the victims of people who do these types of crimes have to have closure.
Christy Sipple, the mother of 5-year-old Kamari Holland, was charged with murder for allegedly selling her daughter to Williams for the purpose of sexual activity. Williams also confessed to a series of other violent crimes against children, including his own child.